The sun has gone down at Hangman's Hill, and the ghost at Misery Corner isn't walking tonight. So, welcome to the Weird Tales radio show, your fortnightly fix of ghost stories, urban myths, magic, and folklore. And now, here's your host, writer, award-winning journalist, best-selling author, and sometime werewolf hunter, Charles Christian.
Hello and welcome to you in paranormal internet radio and podcast land. This is our 16th show and we'll be looking into the origins of Friday the 13th. In our big interview we'll be finding out everything you ever wanted to know about Aleister Crowley but were afraid to ask. We'll be suggesting you get out your Hagstones to fight the evil eye. And, is it a bird? Is it a plane? No, it's the monster Lechuza Owl Witch. More of that later. And for light relief, we'll also be playing some suitably occult music by Ozzy Osbourne. And now, here's Janie.
Hello everyone. I say, Charles, do we have any ghostly unshriven stories, spectres, walking the highways and byways of our green and pleasant land tonight at all?
Well, it's actually remarkably quiet on the paranormal manifestations front, with no notable occurrences to report. Perhaps it's something to do with the Easter school holidays.
What? As in the ghosts have to stay in at night this week because they can't find a babysitter?
Something like that. However, we do have Friday the 13th coming up, don't we? Which occurs twice this year. The second one is in July. So what can you tell us about Friday the 13th?
Well, it's an interesting one, as it looks as if the superstitions around Friday the 13th, being an unlucky day, are a relatively modern urban myth, actually.
Really?
Yeah. For example, the tale we were always told at school was that it was unlucky because there were 13 people present at the Last Supper, and Jesus was executed on a Friday. But, and here's the catch, although there's a tradition that both Fridays and the number 13 are unlucky, there's no record of the two items being referred to as especially unlucky in conjunction before the 19th century. And to further confuse matters, in Spain and Greece, they believe Tuesday the 13th is an unlucky date. How very silly! But in Italy, it's Friday the 17th, which is equally silly, of course. That gets them worried.
Isn't there a connection between Friday the 13th and the Knights Templars?
Yes and no. See, while it's true that the mass arrests of the Knights Templars began in France on Friday the 13th of October 1307, as anybody knows, there's no mention of this being the origin of the superstition until 1955. And of course, Dan Brown's The Da Vinci Code novel has popularised this suggestion in recent years. Oh, yeah. Now, incidentally, triskaidekaphobia is a fear of the number 13. There's even a term for the fear of Friday the 13th, which is really frigatriskaidekaphobia. Although statistically speaking, in terms of insurance claims, etc., Friday the 13th are no more dangerous than any other day. I think we kind of knew that, really, didn't we?
Yes.
Anyway, I'll leave you with the thought that it was on Friday the 13th of November 1789 that Benjamin Franklin wrote that in this world nothing can be said to be certain except death and taxes.
Thank you, Janie. And thank you for that wonderful tip for a word for anybody playing Scrabble.
Oh, yeah.
Triskaidekaphobia or frigatriskaidekaphobia. We'll be talking to Janie later on in the show. Time now for our big interview, in which I'm talking to Ashley Cowie about Aleister Crowley, one of the most influential and seriously misunderstood characters in modern magical practice and occult theory. As for Ashley Cowie, he's the nearest person I know to a real-life Indiana Jones. He's a Scottish historian, author and documentary filmmaker. His books, articles and television shows explore lost cultures and kingdoms, ancient crafts and artefacts, symbols and architecture, myths and legends, telling thought-provoking stories that together offer insights into our shared social history. Ashley currently lives in Colombia, South America, filming documentaries, writing blog articles and travelling to Scotland regularly to film the People's History Show on STV. Ashley also delivers live webinars and writes regular features and news stories for the Ancient Origins website. You can find out much more about Ashley, including a number of video reports he's made, on his website at https://ashleycowie.com. Ashley is ASHLEYCOWIE. ashleycowie.com. A lot of the work you do is ancient civilizations, archaeology, related mysteries, etc. But you've also got this fascination in the occult and in particular with the man we're going to be talking about today.
And what's going to rise from this interview is that in so many ways I've got the same type of head as Aleister Crowley, where I'm so grounded in logic and fact, but the other side of me is a sea of possibility and esoteric abyss. Simple. And it's taken me a long time to realise that. It's only now I'm confident enough to admit that, because I've been a hard-nosed, blatant skeptic for 20 years in the public eye. But I'm going to kill myself if I continue to deny the other part. You know, it is an interesting situation. It is an interesting place to be in. It is, but it's, as I say, it's virtually what Crowley was. Albeit he was pre-scientific, but he was one of the architects of clinical psychology. He was a pioneer in consciousness 50 years before Timothy Leary. So what he was doing was wholly scientific at the time, and now it's interpreted as occultic, satanic, devilish. Crowley would have laughed at this. It's exactly what he wanted. He's a jokester, a trickster.
Yes.
And it's in understanding that I'm not actually entering an esoteric world. What I'm doing is entering a pre-scientific world of the explorations into consciousness. Just what Crowley did. And if I start getting scared of that by thinking it's occult, it's everything else, I'm going to miss an enormous component that I've got here because of the way we term these things, which is awful.
When did you first start being interested in Crowley? What attracted you into in the first place?
When I was 17 years old, like everybody else, I was interested in telekinesis, ESP, the psychic world. All of these things are possible when you're in your teens. And I came across Crowley, and I fell for the brand, the most evil man, the most wicked man in the world. I fell for that, and he terrified me. And the truth is, I tried to read some of his works, but it was so intellectually beyond me that I left it until my early 30s. And it was only after not learning history and learning the past, but learning about myself and getting a bit of self-experience and awareness that all of a sudden Crowley's words and work start to make sense in my personal life, in my relationships, in what I actually desire to do and what I decide not to do. Big difference is he would have done the thing that he desired. Do what thou will, being his motto. So what I eventually did was, instead of having a fear for the man, I started getting a respect for the man. And then you start to see the genius that lay underneath what is nothing more than a literary philosopher. That's what he was, a literary philosopher, playing with words, playing with tone, playing with suggestion, playing with our minds. And he was a mind painter, and that's what I have him as now.
When you say a mind painter, can you just amplify that a little?
Yeah. What I mean by that is you can be reading a line in Crowley's book, and it has an Orthodox Christian overtone. It's maybe about the Virgin Mary. But when you look just beyond the first level, there's maybe a really dirty joke line right beneath it. And what you think is, okay, so here's the evil of Crowley coming out. He's using the Virgin Mary and distilling a really dirty joke. But what happens is when you look at that, when you look at the dirty element to that joke, it pulls you right back around to a very mystical concept, maybe relating to the Kabbalah or to the way that numbers work. And then what you do is you start to question yourself because you realize that the dirty joke was in your head. It wasn't Crowley. He teased it from you. So all of a sudden, you've been beyond the obvious religious connotation. You've been beyond the mystic hint. And then you're at this open place where you realize you projected that horrid thought outwards. So what he does is he paints suggestions onto everybody's mind. And depending what's already in there, that's what you project out. And he does it genius. He can write a sentence that has maybe 8 to 10 different meanings in it. So to a Kabbalist, it means one thing. To a Christian, it means another. To a devil worshipper, it means something else. To a Jungian psychologist, it means something else. That's what I mean by a mind painter. He creates doorways for us to project our minds outwards, and not many writers have been able to do that.
Yeah. Do you think one of the issues Crowley faced in his life and subsequently is a lot of people took him seriously and didn't realise that he was a jokester?
That is exactly what's happened. And it's amazing because when I post on Facebook or social media today, my video clips or my articles or my thoughts on Crowley, you know that at least 60% of the people reading that will say, I can't believe you fall for that evil, devil-worshipping. What you've got to do is throw away all these inhibitions and categories and borders and boundaries that we've been programmed with since we were children and read the man for a non-occultic, non-spiritual, non-spooky human being, a writer. But people do project their fears onto Crowley, but he knew that. He instigated that. He was absolutely a trickster. And what he was as well was an attention seeker, where at the time, if he could see a way to do something that would shake the establishment of society, my goodness, he did it. What's amazing to me about Crowley is that he died at 72 and he didn't spend as much as a day in prison. If somebody today shook the establishment and society as much as he did, he's going to be banged up. The fact he wasn't institutionalized or prisoned is amazing because he did. For example, he wrote a book of hymns, which he claimed was recited by a nun, and it was about the Virgin Mary. But underlying this was just a devilish tract of esoteric nonsense and suggestions, and basically it turned out that the Virgin Mary was a figment or a projection of Isis, the Egyptian goddess. And this was shocking. What he's done is taken the icon of the Christian religion and showed how she's really just a rebirth of Isis. Do you know something? Mid-19th century, late 19th century, saying that the Virgin Mary is nothing more than a Christianization of Isis, that is shocking. That's like saying something terrible against Muhammad today. You're taking your life in your hands at that time. So he did. He was an absolute trickster and a jokester, and he really did challenge the society at the time. But what's really quite interesting, Charles, is as shocking as he was at the time in a late 19th century pre-Victorian society, he's more shocking today. We're even tighter today. Our moral standards and social expectations are so politically correct today that Crowley projects more fear in our world than he did at the time. That is astounding. We've actually regressed consciously as a collective society to find Crowley more shocking today and not to see him as a Victorian trickster and an explorer of his creative imagination. To think that people fear him and associate him with some real-life, physical, manifested devil is just wholly an indictment on our society today, I think.
He's a fascinating character with aspects of his life. I mean, he was a highly successful mountaineer in the Himalayas, wasn't he? Was it Kachinjunga he climbed?
Robert Burns said a sentence which I think applies to Crowley directly. He said this, he goes, he's a man of many parts. And I think it's true. And Crowley was a successful mountaineer, but apart from the self-challenges that he put up, he was also, it took me a long time to actually figure out if this was, again, just social myth or urban legend or true, but he was a part-time employee of MI5. He was rubbing shoulders with Ian Fleming, who created James Bond. He was rubbing shoulders with Alan Turing. So just look at the works of Ian Fleming. They lived in this sort of semi-fictional, pre-scientific world of possibilities where the fear that the Russians might be developing psychic powers and occult sciences, they employed Crowley, and he was working in this, what was known as the double-cross division, with Turing and with Fleming. So, let's be frank, we know MI5 don't just pick people because they're smart. They have the pick of the highest IQs in this nation. And they must have integral parts within greater teams, not just within their own theories. So, an accomplished mountaineer, an accomplished pioneer in consciousness before it had been formalized. And then, let's just look at this. Not only that, he traveled the East and he learned yogic and tantric systems. He translated the Chinese I Ching. He was a master in cultures, not just languages. He learned Chinese, he learned Cantonese, but he also translated the mystic aspects of these religions, the 7 chakra of the Eastern religions. He married it with the 10 sephirot of the Kabbalistic tree and formed what became known as Thelema, this challenge to Christianity. But do you see the disciplines that he had to become a master of to be able to become the Crowley that we know today? He wasn't just a mountaineer challenging his physical aspects. He wasn't just an intellect working for MI5 challenges intellectual aspects. He was this man of many parts that was achieved in so many different aspects, where you might be a smart guy, you're able to talk your way in and out of anything. I might be able to write a letter that's going to win a funding for something. He could do it all. He was self-sufficient, made money as a writer. How many people do you know even today make money as a writer? Crowley did that too.
Yeah.
So it's hard for me not to respect the man, and all the bits that people hate about the man, I facepalm and laugh and think, what you hate are your own fears. It's so true. It really is.
Yeah.
And this idea of being called 666, the great beast, again, just a great joke to Crowley, a real challenger to everybody else. Today, the amount of people that have him as some kind of manifested devil is beyond me.
Yes.
He never thought he was occultic. He didn't think he had what you would call extra powers. In his latter days, he started writing really honestly, and one of his most wonderful pieces was 2 years before he died, where he wrote down a realization where he said, I truly don't believe I have the abilities to think and make changes in the material world. But what I have learned is I make the changes within, and my material world alters accordingly. He became very clear that he didn't have extra powers or superpowers, and admitted that. Your modern religious reader today, they're never going to get as far as Crowley's last admission, his clarity of these sciences. He didn't believe everything he did. People believe everything he says today. He didn't believe half of what he said. He contradicted himself in a sentence whereby he would be referring to the holy guardian angel, which he believed one had to communicate with before you could get to the higher realms of consciousness. He said within 2 days, he told one man, Awas, the higher level of consciousness, the 9th level of human consciousness, he said, is not part of the psyche. It is a greater intelligence, a higher form that exists out with our conscious understanding. The very next day, he wrote down, Awas, the 9th level, is a component of the human mind. Complete contrast in one day.
Yeah.
So people studying Crowley have got to get those contrasts and conflicts. And that doesn't mean he was bullshitting. It means he was in such intense psychological practice that he was upgrading his understanding about what he was doing within a day.
Yeah.
And quite open about that. He wasn't caring about being called a contradiction on Facebook. He didn't have critics on the moment contradicting what he did. He got away with these things.
Yeah.
But today, when we're all hyper-analytical, we look at it and say, well, he said that, changed it and said that, so he's a bullshitter. No, he wasn't. He just changed his mind.
Lovely. What about Crowley and, to go back to it, the occult? There's the incident way back about 1900, wasn't it, when he challenged the Irish poet Yeats to a magician's duel or something, isn't there? Was that serious, or was
Yeah.
that him having fun again?
Well, let's look at this. Crowley certainly did explore for an occultic, non-material level, okay? And he was involved in these arts. Famously, he united with MacGregor Mathers, the head of the OTO, and to support him when he was having internal problems. And then he had a falling out with MacGregor Mathers and started what you just referred to as this psychic war where they were raising demons against each other. But look, when it comes to the occult, let's be honest, there's no science there. There's no ABC 1, 2, 3. When you're involved in psychic battles with another occultist, the real question is who's the craziest out of the two of them, okay? However, really, let's be honest, however, they truly believed they were doing this, but I can't answer your question directly, and the reason for that is there's so much myth about Crowley. One of the biggest stories associated to him was published in a book called For the Devil a Bride. In this book, Crowley had a son, MacGregor Crowley. They entered a hotel room in Paris. They drew a pentagram. They raised the devil himself. The next day, Crowley's son, MacGregor, was admitted to a hospital and died. Crowley was put into an institution. 6 months later, he died of a heart attack. So there's a story that's been repeated more than any other story about Crowley. The trouble we've got with this is not only did Crowley never have a son, there was no MacGregor Crowley. The son naturally did not get institutionalized, and Crowley didn't die of a heart attack in Paris. So, but it's the most repeated story about Crowley. So what his psychic battle with Yeats happened, but what the reality and how much occult was involved in that, it really depends on what your interpretation of the occult was. They believed they were raising and changing the energies available to them to screw each other over. That is essentially what they believed they were doing. Now, these kind of practices can have results, not occultic, but in real life. So what happens is if I have everybody around me thinking against somebody and anti somebody, every little move they do in their life is going to go against that person. You do start to affect the reality of the person that you're thinking you're affecting. So things would happen, things might happen, and you would interpret them and could be interpreted as occultic. But Crowley, more than he truly believed the Book of the Law. That was different from everything else. Everything Crowley did can be interpreted as jokester, trickster, playing with people's minds, but there was something different about the Book of the Law. He believed that was channeled to him in Egypt by this entity called Awaz, one of the most powerful entities in the universe. He never, ever joked about that book. He lived by the precepts of that book, struggled to adhere to the words of that book. There was no signs that was a joke. The chances are high that he truly believed that book came from divine source. And I'm pretty much a feet on the ground guy, but I will say this: the Book of the Law is spooky enough to always make you question, where did that come from? Because it's so markedly different from everything else that the jokester did. I'm not saying that it came from divine source, but it came from either a level within that man's consciousness that we still don't understand today and can't categorize. Some kind of understanding of as Jung would have called it, the collective consciousness. It was almost like he had his finger strings on the socio-political games of the time. What he saw and projected as far as emotion, society within the Book of the Law is almost like a historical tract on the times of the feeling of the people at the times, and it's a piece of work. It's a piece of work. Every page and every chapter has a Kabbalistic reference or a magical reference and a double meaning. And the more you read the Book of the Law, the more you understand it. I'm not actually the best reader. What I do is I put on audiobooks and I listen to them over and over. And I start to see the Book of the Law as, I've got it up as a classic now, written before, this is kind of before spiritualism and mediumship really took off. It was inspired greatly by Crowley. And the Book of the Law it's distinctly separate. Crowley did believe that came from occultic source, where he kind of gamed and played with a lot of other stuff. That changed him for sure. That was almost like the whole submission of Crowley to the occultic world almost. That convinced him. But then, as I say, laterally, he realized that, everything starts and stops with a thought, with an idea. And that's, so he got a real understanding of how consciousness works, but having to trawl through a lifetime of experimentation and exercises on how the mind works. That's the thing with Crowley. The way he writes the Book of the Law, the way he writes his books, is he makes enough suggestion to really make you want to do the exercises. And the exercises do bring on change. For example, to enable one to transcend ego, for example, before they can start path working on the tree of life within any magical system, Crowley, claims that you have to go through several months of reading texts backwards, thinking thoughts in reverse, wearing clothing on inside out, a complete reversal to this reality. The mind must become very, very good at seeing the opposite from what is here, thus enabling one to perceive the non-material level of the material world that we live in. Mm-hmm. And his work basically appeared in Jungian psychology, Freudian psychology, and in every modern psychotherapist's office today. His progression about how to transcend the ego is the first thing a psychologist, if you see someone that's all caught up in their ego, lost in self, it's almost the words of Crowley that they're reading when they're doing Jungian psychology, in the way to see yourself from an objective, outside stance instead of being wholly wrapped in ego. Remember, we know the word we talk about ego today and we just throw it out, and we talk about psyche today, we throw it subconscious, unconscious, all words we throw out. They didn't exist. Crowley was guessing as to these things. He was guessing as to these mechanics in the mind. Nobody else was doing that. He was a psychonaut, an absolute psychonaut.
Yeah. And he predated Freud, didn't he? His timeline, or?
Yes, he worked for them and sort of ran currently with them. They all kind of died at the same time in the sort of between the 40s and 60s. Yeah. But it was Carl Jung, Sigmund Freud's student, who was the founder of psychoanalysis. He was presented with Crowley's Kabbalistic tree of life from Thelema, and he was expected to have completely trashed it. And Jung said one word to Crowley's work, and that was brilliance.
Lovely.
This is the most respected psychologist in our world. One word for Crowley: brilliance. He daren't say any more, because if he aligned with Crowley, he would have been in a bad place.
Yes.
However, he certainly saw the brilliance, and especially because Carl Jung had so much interest in the alchemical, Kabbalistic elements of the perceived spiritualism or the psyche. And Crowley was masterfully experimenting and working in those fields. But as Jung was doing it through processes of observing people on his bed, Crowley was going through processes of applying different forms of psychotropic drugs with different states of the year, different seasons, different alignments within his temples. So they were both doing the same kind of thing, which is Jung mapping the conscious mind using science and observations, where Crowley was out doing it using pseudoscience and practice and experimentation. Both experimenting in human consciousness.
That's wonderful.
And of course, to Crowley, when he talked about the devil, we read it today and go, oh my God, a red guy with horns and hoofs, and it's the Antichrist, the devil. To Crowley, the devil in one book might have just been jealousy. Might have been his emotion of envy in the next book. See, he was describing emotions with archetypes like the devil and demons and whatnot. And stupidly today, we have people who believe this as to be real. Crowley didn't.
Yeah.
Everything was potential, Crowley. Everything was potential, and everything was always moving. We live in a static world today. To feel safe, we like to know what our salary is, our starting hours is, our time is, when the bus leaves, when the train leaves. Crowley lived in a non-static, movable world, which is closer attuned to the way nature and reality works than the guy who's got his timetable, his logic, and his reasons in his compartments. Nature does not do reasons in compartments.
You are listening to the Weird Tales radio show with Charles Christian on internet radio and podcast.
Towards the latter part of his life, Crowley seems to have, I don't know, well, I know financially he fell on hard times. I believe he'd also become addicted to opium or heroin. And it's it's rather a sad ending for him, dying in a boarding house, isn't it, or lodgings in Hastings. Somehow it all fell to pieces in the sort of final act for him.
Well, Crowley was always destined to fall to pieces for one reason. For the reason was in his 50s, he made a claim, which was that he was Horus, a rebirth of Horus, and he was going to lead this new, what he called the Aeon of Horus, this new time that we're in. Now, I think when a 40 or 50-year-old man believes he's a manifested leader of humanity from angelic divine sources.
Yeah.
And then gets to his 70s and realizes that he's maybe the only one that's buying that, and it was all just a figment of my imagination. I don't have people with flags behind me waving Crowleyanity as the next Chris. So what I think he did was he got to realize that he was human like everybody else, and that he couldn't change the world when he was alive. And his fears in this are manifest in the name he gave his church, Thelema. He chose Thelema. Wouldn't a man with such ego have been predicted to call it Crowleyanity? Do you know what? Crowley was so scared that he'd be reborn. He was so scared he'd be reborn in 2,000 years and see that Crowleyanity had became the same disgusting associations as Christianity. So he said, I can't have my name on this. It's going to be Thelema. Because a man putting his name on the religion is the problem with Christianity. It's an ego-based, wholly masculine pyramid system with a man at the top. So he went against that. But I don't think there was any other destiny for him. He spent the monies that he had. He funded his own research all the way through. He got writing contracts, and he did all sorts of stunts. But yeah, I think today to find a man in a beach house at 72-year-old is quite a sad way to end. You'd think you'd have more than that. But it was his destiny. He was destined to go that way. His writings do become a little sadder in the last year. There's a lot of realization in there of his own tomfoolery. I think what happens is, here's what I like to say about Crowley. And anybody in society that takes on what I call the clown archetype. So he takes on the clown archetype, the joker, the trickster. Mm-hmm. I've seen it with friends of mine, and I've seen it in life. When somebody adopts the clown archetype, when the audience has gone home, all that's left is an empty clown suit. And that's what happened to Crowley. He lost his audience. Science started coming in. It was into the 20th century. A lot of what he was projecting as potentially spiritual and occultic was just getting absolutely carbon and electrons placed around it. Everything was becoming systemized, and I think he lost a lot of faith in himself. I think he would have gone crazy if he lived into his 80s. I think he went when he needed to go because he was on a downward slope, as you say. But I don't think that detracts in any way from his works, which again, I have to say, a philosophical, linguistic philosopher is what he was. And some of this, I'm a writer. I've got 4 books on the shelf. When I hear and read some of the 6 and 7 word sentences from Crowley, I've seen myself, Charles, honestly, a few weeks ago, I threw a book across my room and swore so hard, and Natalia, my girlfriend, asked me what's wrong. I said, what's wrong is I know I can never be as good as this fucker. He's gone, but he was a genius, a master of phrase and word and double meaning and double entendre. And, he could say a sentence that one person could be absolutely endeared and loved by it. And right beside that person, somebody is horrified and shocked. And Crowley knew exactly the bandwidth and parameters of the emotional connection. He would predict that. real genius in writing, Charles, totally, above all of his other achievements. What he did with the English language, it should be celebrated beyond everything else. And of course, remember, Crowley's number one rule, the first and foremost practice in any magical system is voice, control of voice. And the most powerful aspect of that being shut up and say nothing. Then you've got full control. The king is silent. The king is silent. The jester is making noise.
When we say, it came to a bit of a sad end for him, but to one extent, along with his writings, he lives on because it's my understanding he and his thoughts were part of the inspiration for Gerald Gardner when he was setting up what's become Gardnerian witchcraft or Wicca in the UK.
Yeah, the Gardner stuff, the white, what's it called? His book, his famous book, the White Priestess, the Triple Priestess. However, there is not a system of magic, of esoteric, or what would you call it as a whole, occultic system alive today that doesn't have direct influence from Crowley. And here's why. Whether it's voodoo, witchcraft, whether it's mystic Sufism, inward Islam, or whether it's sacred, whether it's mystical Judaism, Crowley pulled together so many esoteric systems from the East and from the West and created a way of understanding esoteric entry, two-path working, and it's the underfelt for all modern day witchcraft. It's the underfelt for all sort of attempts at sorcery, attempts at mind magic. They all start and stop with an understanding of the Kabbalistic tree. Crowley created it. Crowley popularized and made what essentially was secular to Judaic mystics. He made that accessible to Western esoteric thinkers, and I would say he is the grandfather, or at least has genes in all forms of magic today. A good magician or a good practitioner of, dare I say, witchcraft, with all the connotations that brings, absolutely knows that Crowley is as good as a universal grandfather to their systems. But there's a lot of jealousy out there, okay? There's a lot of people that reject the works of Crowley and try to better it and to clean it up, because today we have such a division. We've got, these things, white magic and black magic. Crowley absolutely hated it. He was referred to as a black magician in a Telegraph article, and he wrote 7 letters of disgust to the author, and he said, I am but a grey magician. I don't work in your modern categories. It's not as simple as that. He was a grey magician. The thing is to Crowley, a piece of magic, or the application of a trick, a curse, a spell, or a process, he only could determine whether it was black or white magic after the result was seen. You can control the process, but you can't control the result. So black magic or white magic is an afterthought. It's an interpretation. But of course, today people say, I am a black magician or I'm a white magician. It's kind of like kids playing adult games. They just don't get it.
That's priceless.
It's true.
Any final thoughts before we wind up on Crowley?
I think my final thoughts on Crowley are this. I'm going to, for anybody out there who's possibly feared him, possibly been interested in him, but it's too heavy, can't understand it, I would advise people to do nothing more than listen to his piece of work or read it called The Wake World. That was the piece that it's a short story, a poem about a girl who meets a guardian angel and transgresses or progresses through the Kabbalistic tree of life, the 10 emanations of the tree of life. That piece of fictional creative writing is about as mystical, as fabulous, as fantastic, and as accessible to these systems as anything that he wrote. It's called The Wake World. It changed my entire understanding of Judaism, changed my entire understanding of Western magic. It took it from being a thing of mysticism spirituality and occultism into a real world application, a thinking process that you can put yourself through that creates clarity of thought, which results in one thing, and that is gold falling into your life rather than shite. If you can clear your channels of creative thinking, you bring goods in and stop bads coming in. That book, The Wake World, showed me how to think systematically and clearly, based loosely on Judaic Kabbalistic tree of life, but it's set out so well. The way he first accesses the subconscious, then it visits the female aspect of that, then the male aspect of that, and they walk through this world, this palace of ideas, and it changed me. And I would dare say anybody else who was at where I was, sitting in the middle, half scared, half overwhelmed, The Wake World brings Crowley into perfect focus, Charles. That's what it does. It brings it into focus. I think that's my best last thought.
That's perfect. Ashley, it's been a delight talking to you. What projects have you got next?
Okay, so I am about to go on Monday. I'm filming a documentary in 5 countries in South America over 3 weeks. Mm-hmm. But I'll tell you what we should tell you, Charles. I'm doing a project with ancientorigins.net, and I've got 10 explorers coming here. We're using LiDAR radar. We're using ground-penetrating radars from helicopters. We're going on an expedition in search of lost carved heads on a remote mountain in Colombia. So all hands on deck for that one. That's taking up most of my time over the next few months.
That sounds brilliant. Ashley, once again, many thanks for your time.
Charles, if there's any other subject matter or anything you'd like to do, maybe we could do it again. I'd be delighted to. I think we clicked really well there.
Yeah. No, it went...
Do you know what? Can I be honest with you, Charles?
Yeah.
I'm straight. I need to tell you something. I do this a lot with different people, and do you know something? You're one of the best, because the biggest job I've got is the people who talk about Crowley and these subjects. The interviewers don't really get it, and they don't know what to ask me. And I get to these horrible places where I'll answer a question and they don't have another one. You had the next one ready at every time. So thank you for that. Thanks for taking the time to understand what you're talking about.
Right. Thank you on that note. Can't better it. Thanks a lot. Take care, and we'll be in touch again.
You're listening to the Weird Tales radio show with Charles Christian, part of the Paranormal UK radio network.
Janie's back now with a story about birds, and not just any birds.
No, indeed. We are talking about big birds, not that sort of birds, Charlie. Anyway, cryptozoology. Cryptozoology and shape-shifting owl witches. For there have been some more reports coming out of the American Southwest, particularly along the Rio Grande Valley between Texas and Mexico, of the fabled fearsome lechuza.
Ooh, I'm all ears.
Right, it's a bit scary.
Okay.
You sure? All right. Right, let's start with some facts. The name lechuza is one of the names the Mexicans call the barn owl. Yeah, that little humble barn owl we have flying around here. And there's a lot of superstition surrounding it because they roost in church towers and swoop around spookily in twilight. However, there is also the legend of La Lechuza, or Owl Witch, which is a giant owl, 7 foot plus tall, with a 15-foot wingspan, but with the face of a woman, albeit a woman with a beak of an owl in place of a nose. Very attractive. The story is these creatures are human witches, or bruja, who have sold their souls to the devil and in return have developed shape-shifting powers, so they are women by day but giant barn owls by night. And there's also another version of the story in which La Lechuza are the spirits of women who've been wronged or even murdered by their husbands, and they've come back for revenge. Anyway, it's notable that all the victims of Lechuza attacks do appear to be men, but I'll come back to that bit in a minute.
So what do these Lalechuzas do once they've transformed themselves into their nocturnal owl witch form?
Well, they are very sneaky because they perch somewhere out of sight And then they make a noise of either a human whistling or a sound of a baby crying to attract attention. Then, when the victim comes out of a house or a building to investigate, they will swoop down and carry them off in their talons. There are even reports of them swooping down to run a car off the road to try to get all the people inside. Anyway, certainly a number of people have claimed to have scratch marks on their car roofs caused by attacking lechuzas.
Is there anything you can do to protect yourself from La Lechuza?
Indeed there is. You can hang a rope with 7 knots in it outside your front door or on your porch, which shows the creature that you acknowledge and respect it, and it will leave you alone. If you see the creature flying at you, an attack can be repelled by a combination of salt and chili powder thrown into the lechuza's face. But if you don't have any salt and chili powder with you, try screaming and cursing at it very loudly. But, I think screaming would be a given, really, anyway, even if you had the chili and the salt.
Yes. You mentioned earlier that all the victims appear to be men.
Yes. Isn't it always the case? Anyway, all the reports from people who've been attacked by La Lechuza and survived, as distinct from the victims who were carried off and never seen again, obviously, happened to be men. Yes, men who had been drinking and reported feelings of being watched and hearing strange whistling before the creature tried to grab them by the shoulders and carry them away. Now, normally, cynical old me would say, drunken man hears strange whistling sound, then is attacked and or comes home with mysterious scratch marks on the roof of his car. That's probably the alcohol talking, isn't it, really? Some excuses for strange lipstick. No, I'm not going to go there. Anyway. However, it's interesting that these owl witch stories come from the same part of North America that has long been associated with legends of the big bird or thunderbird of Native American folklore. So I ask, is there a connection? Are the lechuza and the thunderbird some form of so far uncategorised cryptid that has escaped capture and scientific investigation? Yeah. Or could it even be race memory? See, reports of the thunderbird go back centuries, and there was a type of giant flying bird in North America. They've found their remains in the La Brea tar pits, and they were called teratons. They were similar to present-day condors, but they stood about 6 feet tall and had wingspans of 18 feet. Anyway, they certainly coexisted with early man. However, the teratons are all meant to have become extinct about 10,000 years ago. Or did they? And just to bring the story right up to date, there is a suggestion the more recent sightings are the result of global warming. Controversial. With non-native species of bird being spotted in the Rio Grande area, not being recognised from what they really are.
Tell me more.
Yes, I knew that would intrigue you. See, for example, the wildlife authorities in Texas have located some jabiru, and they're in the Rio Grande area. Now, the jabiru are a species of Central American stork capable, they actually exist, I'll just make that point quite clear, capable of growing to heights of roughly 5 feet with wings spanning 10 feet when in flight. The animal is white in plumage with a featherless head that is black in colour with bright red markings on its neck. So if people were to encounter a jabiru in the dark, it is possible to see how its size and posture might have resulted in reports of a giant bird-like monster.
Brilliant. So we can blame global warming for anything now. Thank you very much, Janie.
You're welcome.
Almost time for us to go, but before we do, time for one final story. You'll recall we talked to Andrew Mercer a couple of shows ago about his new book, The Wicked Shall Decay. I've now got my hands on a copy and I've had a chance to read it. I particularly like this spell from 1859, designed to protect you from witches and the evil eye. First of all, make a necklace of hagstones. Yeah, okay, what are hagstones? Also known as witch stones, lucky stones, adder stones and holy stones, hagstones are stones with naturally occurring holes through them, the geological equivalent of polo mints, and they are said to have many magical properties. These include preventing nightmares if you string them to your bedhead, curing whooping cough if you hang them around your neck on a piece of cord, allowing you to glimpse fairy or fairyland, the land of the fae, when you hold a hagstone up to your eye in the style of a monocle and look through it, as well as allowing you to spot fairy and witch disguises and traps. You should be able to find hagstones on any shingle beach, although out here in East Anglia, I've always found the beach at Walberswick a particularly good hunting ground for hagstones. In fact, last time I was there, a Walberswick pub was selling hagstones at £1 a go. Though, like all things magical, it is better that you find them yourselves rather than buy them off someone else. Anyway, once you have your hagstones, string them up together as a necklace and then hang it behind your front door, saying as you do, "From witches and wizards and long-tailed buzzards and creeping things that run in hedge bottoms, good Lord, deliver us." Janie and I will be back in 2 weeks' time. Till then, some final words from Aleister Crowley that will resonate with everyone who takes an interest in the paranormal. Science is always discovering odd scraps of ancient magical wisdom and then making a tremendous fuss about its cleverness. Good night.
Black Shuck, the demon dog of East Anglia, is baying at the moon. Which means it's time for us to go. You've been listening to the Weird Tales radio show with Charles Christian, your fortnightly fix of ghost stories, urban myths, magic and folklore. Keep in touch with us online at www.urbanfantasist.com or by email at urbanfantasist@icloud.com and on Twitter at Christian Uncut. Good night. Join us again in 2 weeks' time for another edition of the Weird Tales radio show. Find us online at www.urbanfantasist.com or email us at urbanfantasist@icloud.com or follow us on Twitter at Christian Uncut.